Welcome to the Executive Coaching Podcast, where executive coach Alicia Cowan will discuss leadership topics and coaching solutions to tackle the most difficult problems that keep you from leading your team to success.
Hey there, executive leaders. It's Alicia Cowan. Welcome back. We are on episode number 86 today. And we have been in the season this spring talking all about executive presence. And today's going to be no different. So I always like to give a quick personal update before we dive right into that topic. And I'll say last time we recorded, I was talking about my daughter's 16th birthday. And so it was a wild success. We took, I think, about 12 girls down to Sarasota, and we had a townhouse. Again, I think I mentioned in previous episodes that we purchased for a short-term rental. And so we stayed there and threw a really big 16-year-old Sweet 16 bash. And it was a lot of fun. And so, yeah, thank you for everybody that wished her happy birthday. It was a good time. To have a 16-year-old is wild. And that's where I'm in the season of life here as I'm recording. And my birthday is actually coming up really soon. It's right around the corner on March 7th, and I'm going to be 48, which is wild. In March, I will be hitting the road. And so I'm going to be meeting up with a client in LA for a conference that we're attending together. And also then I'm going to take advantage of being in California, and I'm going to fly up to Santa Rosa to see one of my older daughters that moved out there last year. And then I'll be coming back down to Santa Monica for my last session in my first year of the Strategic Coach Program by Dan Sullivan. So that's what's happening this March, a busy spring, and I'm loving this year so far. It's been a lot, but in all the best ways possible. So I will keep you updated on that. And if you follow me on LinkedIn or any social media, I'll try to bring you along. I'll do my best to give you guys updates on what's happening. But today, let's dive right into it. Let's talk about executive presence. And today I want to talk about more real life stories that I've experienced. And again, having been in a situation to observe executives and talk very closely, intimately with them, I get a lot of firsthand knowledge around what the rituals are of leaders whose executive presence really stands out and commands the room. And I want to talk about that today. I've been doing my best to help unpack this, or demystify, really, I think, executive presence, because I feel like it's such a blanket term that's used out there that a lot of executives and people aspiring to be executives get that feedback a lot about you need to improve your executive presence. I've even given that feedback before, and not knowing exactly what and how to interpret that feedback if you're on the receiving end. So that's what we want to do today, is talk a little bit more tactically about it and give you some stories that are real life. So for me, executive presence, I always reiterate on this podcast, it's not just charisma. I actually had somebody meet with me recently, potential client, that talked about a speaker that they felt was super charismatic, and they really wanted that charisma that they wanted to steal. Now, it can be a part of it, but it's not everything. It's only one very small component of what embodies executive presence. So what other elements are not out of executive presence are just being loud or being high volume or being high energy. It's also not about being the smartest person in the room. It's more about how you show up and regulate yourself, how you think, and how you show up when it absolutely matters the most in those rooms that matter the most. So in my executive coaching practice, I don't teach leaders just how to perform or put on some sort of like act out there. I teach and help them become so clear and so grounded that their executive presence just becomes inevitable. It becomes natural to them. It becomes habits that they build, and it becomes second nature to them. And so that does take work and it does take practice. But the leaders who get this and the leaders who rise to the occasion, they all have a set of rituals. And that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we get to some of those more like tactical things that you can actually take with you and also use out there? So, first thing I want to talk about is redefining executive presence. So I talk to leaders again all the time about what executive presence means and what it looks like. And from a leader's perspective, executive presence is the emotional regulation under pressure and under those like pressure cooker moments. How do you not react, but how do you regulate yourself and show up in a way that's very intentional? It's also strategic clarity while you're in very ambiguous situations. How do you remain big picture focused when things are cloudy and you're not necessarily sure exactly how to proceed? A lot of times, executives, we are not handed the answers. We are not handed the playbook. We have to figure out how to be strategic, how to have clear vision, even when the water is very muddy. We also have seen that executive presence is all about being able to make strong, very clear decisions, to be decisive without being arrogant. So you have to be able to make the decisions and still have the balance of listening to others and doing that with the proper amount of humility, but also being able to make bold decisions. And again, not in this arrogant way, not by putting other people's opinions or thoughts down, but just being able to go with a decision that you believe in. And executive presence is also being able to listen and powerfully, actively listen to other opinions, but without shrinking in the room, without muting yourself, without hiding in the corner and deferring to others. There is a way to actively listen. And executive presence is also about speaking and communicating with intention and not impulse and not reactivity. Okay. So those are some ways, again, I know sometimes executive presence can get misconstrued. And so those are some examples of from the leaders that I interact with and speak with. Those are elements of executive presence. And I want to tie this back to then what is the stakes? How do we tie this back to being a C-suite leader and what the stakes are that this is in exchange for? So if you think about board meetings and earnings calls and maybe investor conversations and having hard people conversations and decisions that you have to make around people, and maybe succession positioning. So getting yourself in that succession plan for the next big role. The executive presence that we're talking about is the currency for those stakes, right? So what I mean by that is the currency you have to earn. This is what you have to do in exchange for some of these high C-suite leader stakes that we want to go after. And so this is what it takes. And a lot of times people don't equate the two, right? Because they think that one input is going to, maybe it's performance, right? Or one input is going to lead to some of these results. When reality is, again, executive presence is a really big part of earning your way into some of these big moments and these big situations. So let's talk about some of these rituals. Let's get tactical. What are some of the rituals of leaders who show up powerfully? Again, one of my goals is demystifying executive presence. And so I think by giving you some of these high-level habits, maybe you'll recognize some of these that you can take with you and you might need yourself. So the first one that I want to give you and offer for you is the pre-meeting reset. I've talked about this before. You have to have time before big meetings as a strong leader to take 3 to 5 minutes alone to prep, to reset yourself, to focus, and to center. And it can be more, but just that quiet moment. Again, if you're prepping for a really big meeting, you might need more time than that, but at least giving yourself a moment to get into the zone. You want to go into this prep session before the meeting to really get clear on your intention. Decide, how do you want to show up? And a lot of work I do with clients is to decide what their leadership style needs to look like or needs to be. And you can have different styles for different moments in time. So this is one where you get to pull, like, what kind of leader, who do I want to be when I show up to this meeting? So decide your intention. Next, you got to clarify the message, the one message that you want to land. And one hack that I like to give to clients is visually put it somewhere. And this can be totally low tech. It can be a post-it note. It could be a digital post-it note. It could be something on a note on your computer that's open. Again, somewhere you can see it, where you have the message. It's one headline, and that's the thing. That's the one takeaway that you want everybody to be able to walk away with. Okay. It's really important to have this discipline around this messaging. And then the last step here in the pre-meeting ritual is to regulate your breathing. You want to make sure that all this mindset work that you're doing is aligned with your body and how you're showing up. So a really simple way to do this is just to breathe before the meeting. Make sure your body, your mind are aligned with an intention that you set in the first step. So however you walk into this meeting is how you're going to lead the meeting. So if you walk in and you're scattered and you're not focused and you're distracted and maybe frustrated, you are going to lead unfocused, scattered, distracted, frustrated, right? So you have to be clear in this pre-meeting ritual to get yourself centered in a way that you want to be. Okay. All right. So that's tactical tip one. Tactical tip two, the future CEO filter is what we'll call this. And a lot of times I'll talk about your future self or your future leader. So insert whatever future self that you want to into this title, but we'll call it the future CEO filter for this podcast today. So high-level leaders, executive leaders, can ask themselves before they go into a situation where they need to call on their executive presence is, how is the next level version of me going to handle this? Is my reaction reactive or is it strategic? And this can be a really powerful filter, and especially for you leaders that are maybe VP or maybe you're like SVP, maybe you're heading for the C-suite, or maybe even you're in C-suite and you're heading towards a CEO role, right? If you're trying to level up, think of yourself in that next level role and ask yourself again, how would I handle this as future me in this role? And why this helps is, again, you are that person today, but you're thinking of next level, a different viewpoint. It helps you get a little bit more objective in it, because even though you're the same person, it's a good way to think of yourself in that next level role and get out of your head. All right. Third tip that I want to give you. All right. Calendar discipline. Calendar discipline can be a really powerful executive presence tool. Executive presence can be visible in the calendar in these ways. Number one, what you say yes to. Two, what you delegate. And three, what you don't attend. So this is all about discernment and discipline, and your executive presence in your calendar is absolutely a leadership statement. And you might be thinking, why? What does that even mean? Well, the deal is, as an executive, you are an actual living example of showing others in the organization how to prioritize. So your calendar and what you are saying no to, what you're saying yes to, it shows others what is important to you. And discernment is one of your most important leadership traits. You are signaling to both yourself and to the rest of the org what is most important out there. And typically leaders that are just people pleasing and saying everything is important and everything is requiring my attention and nobody can make any decisions without me and I have to be in every meeting. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely not what your job is. Your job is to focus on the few and focus on the most important. But if your calendar is saying yes to everything, then your signal is that everything is important. And so that's how executive presence and giving yourself the discipline to really edit and be clear, it signals again to not only to you, but to everyone that's watching you what is priority. So think about that. Calendar discipline. When you show up like with every single meeting as the most important thing, then again, it doesn't necessarily always allow you as an executive to show up in the way that you would want. All right. And then my last very tactical ritual is the post-meeting reflection. So after very high stakes conversations, doesn't have to be after every meeting, you can ask yourself a very simple reflection. What landed? Maybe where did I rush or speak too quickly? Maybe where did I over explain or need to fill the silence? Did I shrink back anywhere? Just a couple of examples of questions, but basically a reflection on what went well, what didn't, what will I do differently next time. The best leaders study themselves. And this reflection, I want to emphasize here, is not about criticizing yourself. It's not about beating yourself up about anything that went not according to plan. It's all about learning from the practice. Okay. So, very four tactical tips there. Now I want to transition into some real coaching stories that are very anonymized, but I think they can be a little bit more of a vivid, clear example of this these examples and trying to help you um, understand, convert some of these concepts into some more tactical, real world things. So the first example I want to give you, I want to talk about a brilliant operator who had the tendency to overspeak. I was aware of the C-suite leader that was highly intelligent, very strategic, very sharp, and a great driver of revenue and getting results. But what happened is when they got into board meetings, she had a tendency to over-explain. She would fill the void of silence with a lot of words, and she also felt like defensive before she was even challenged. So she had this tendency to defend her position when there was no challenge being given to her. It was like a made up story, but she felt this need to react in that way in the moment, just to make sure she was trying to cover all the bases. So what we worked on together was some simple tactics: pausing, shortening up her answers and commentary by about 30%, and letting silence work in her favor. So by the next quarter, when we had the next board meeting, the feedback shifted to the commentary was being more CEO ready, being more grounded, being more confident. And in this transformation that we did together, it wasn't about trying to be smarter in the moment. She was highly intelligent enough already. It was about regulation. It was all starting with her mindset shift and how she went into those meetings, which helped her show up in a more intentional way. The second example I want to illustrate for you is all about this executive who shrunk around a more dominant peer. A lot of us have been there and felt this, right? So this was a senior executive leader within the organization that is highly capable and tapped as a successor. But when this person got around this one particular executive leader, he was very deferential. He backed down. He got quiet. He let this person be the alpha in the room. And this executive was a more tenured leader and was also somebody that was a mentor to this person. So it was just this habit that was built in. So when we worked together, what we uncovered was some of these like triggers around authority and old authority triggers, again, because this has been a long-standing mentor-mentee relationship. And there was this internal narrative that carried from this long-standing relationship about needing to prove himself when that had already occurred. We were way beyond that. So the new ritual became, when heading into meetings with this other person, just being very strategic and writing one strategic question in advance. So again, that meeting prep, being very clear about the message that he wanted to land, committing to speak very early on in the first few minutes of the meeting and slowing down the speech very intentionally. They say, studies show, slower and deeper can really make a bigger impact. So after working together months later, we were firing all cylinders. He was leading cross-functional conversations. He was showing up as an industry leader. He was speaking publicly. And this executive presence was less about the tactics that we even talked about. It was actually the more about the psychological impact, right? And trying to unpack that first, that then showed up in the tactics, right? And then showed up in the actions. So I want to give you that example as a way of showing you how mindset can really make the shift to help the actions. Because sometimes when you're just trying to perform the actions, it doesn't align because you're not there mentally yet. All right, last example I want to give you is all about a high performer who is chasing after the CEO role. So this leader, ambitious, super capable, but when they were in conflict moments, they became very reactive. We all know a leader like this. So what we did together is built what I call a framework for conflict response framework. And so part of that framework was a very simple 90-second emotional pause rule. So what this can look like, again, I said it earlier, sometimes the breath work and pausing before we decide to respond can help us regulate and can be really helpful. So this is just breathing without reacting. Doesn't mean you don't speak. Doesn't mean you go into this weird statuesque mode. It just means you don't have to respond from that place of frustration. And it's just allowing yourself a moment, 90 seconds, to pause before you decide to act from that place. And then we also work through some very clear language scripts for some of the tough conversations. They're going to happen inevitably. Conflicts will come up, tough conversations are going to come up for you as an executive. And executive presence is not showing up as someone that's calm because you're lucky or you were born that way or because it's in your personality. I hear that a lot. It's calm. Your executive presence is calm because you've trained for it like an athlete, right? It's just like you're trying to train to hit a home run or train to make a touchdown. In practice, you don't get it right 100% of the time. Actually, when you play the game, you don't get it right 100% of the time, but you train for it, you reflect on it, and you try to get better at it. Okay. Same thing with being executive. So, in closing, I want to wrap up and say the truth that a lot of leaders avoid is the fact that you cannot outsource your executive presence. And what I mean by that is some leaders want to outsource their executive presence to a title. They think just because they've gotten to a certain level in the organization or they got the title, that will equate to executive presence. Some leaders want to outsource it to their experience. They're like, I've been doing this for so long. Naturally, I will just have this executive presence. And that doesn't always show up that way. And it also doesn't show up just because you've driven results. I talked about this a little bit in my last podcast. A lot of people are tying their executive presence or their leadership to their performance. And that, again, doesn't always equate. So executive presence is how do you work through self-mastery under visibility? A lot of times as a leader, you are extremely visible to the organization, to your leaders, to the board. And most leaders that I work with or that I encounter out there, they don't lack the ability to master executive presence. What they lack is this structured reflection moment and the structured accountability to actually work through this. And that's where getting coaching can change everything. So if you are a leader and you are stepping into bigger rooms, bigger experiences, if you are positioning yourself for the next level role or for a C-suite role, if you are leading through complexity, or if perhaps you're like one of my clients, you're constantly being told you're almost there when you're heading when you're leading up the next project or when you're trying to get a promotion. And you should just keep doing what you're doing with no real actionable feedback or any movement that you see happening. Then executive presence may be the unspoken gap. And here's the truth. It is hard to see past your own blind spots at this level. A lot of times leaders at the executive level are not getting the feedback that they need. And that is the work that I do. I help executive leaders close this invisible gap between competence and command of the room. And so, my friends, if this episode is hitting on and touching on a note for you, that is not accidental. You are being called for something bigger. And if this is you, or you know somebody that this might support and help, then I would love to talk. So remember, executive presence is not about being louder. It's not about being naturally born charismatic. It's about being so clear and so grounded that the room will actually adjust to you. So, friends, that is what I have for you today. I hope all of you enjoyed this episode, and thank you so much for listening. If any of this struck a nerve and you want to talk more about it, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can find me on my website. It's aliciacowencoaching.com. It's ELISIAKEOWN coaching.com. And you can schedule a time to talk with me right there on my website. And I would love to talk about any of these topics with you further. All right. Thanks for listening. See you soon, friends. Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Executive Coaching Podcast with Alicia Cowen. If you're ready to have an executive coach who's ready to help you lead your team to success, then book an introductory call at aliciacowencoaching.com/call.